A classified memorandum buried for decades in the archives of the 8th Air Force and only recently declassified reveals something that official histories have spent 80 years obscuring. In January 1945, at the height of the strategic bombing campaign, General James Doolittle himself warned his superiors that the P-51 Mustang, the aircraft already being celebrated as the savior of American bomber crews, was suffering engine failure rates that would have grounded any other fighter in the inventory. The memo was quietly filed. The Mustang's legend continued to grow, and the P-47 Thunderbolt, the aircraft that had done the majority of the actual killing since 1943, was gradually written out of the story that America wanted to tell itself. Question: why did the Mustang become the symbol of air superiority, while the Thunderbolt did the majority of the fighting? How did a narrative take root that elevated one machine and diminished the other, when the combat records tell a fundamentally different story? To understand this contradiction, one must first understand what the Mustang represented, and what it actually was. The North American P-51 was without question one of the most aesthetically perfect fighters ever built. Its laminar flow wing, its sleek fuselage, its long nose housing the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, all combined to create a silhouette that seemed to embody speed itself. It was fast, with a top speed approaching 440 miles per hour at altitude. It was maneuverable, with handling qualities that pilots described as effortless and intuitive. And most critically, it had range. With drop tanks, the P-51D could escort B-17 flying fortresses all the way to Berlin and back, a reach that no other Allied fighter could match. This range solved the central strategic problem of 1943 and early 1944, how to protect the bomber streams deep into German airspace, where the Luftwaffe had previously enjoyed uncontested freedom to attack. The Mustang's arrival in large numbers in early 1944 coincided with a shift in American strategic doctrine. The bomber barons of the USAF, who had long insisted that the bomber will always get through, and that fighters were essentially irrelevant to strategic bombing, had been proven catastrophically wrong by the Schweinfurt raids of August and October 1943. Escorted bomber formations had suffered losses of 20% or more, rates that were mathematically unsustainable. The bomber advocates needed a narrative that would preserve their institutional credibility while acknowledging the new reality that fighters were indispensable. The P-51, with its unprecedented range, provided that narrative perfectly. It was not that the bomber doctrine had been wrong, the story went. It was simply that the right fighter had not yet been available. Now it was. The Mustang became the technical solution that allowed the strategic bombing narrative to survive its own failures. But this narrative required selective memory. It required forgetting that the P-47 Thunderbolt had been escorting bombers since April 1943, months before the Mustang arrived in meaningful numbers. It required forgetting that the Thunderbolt had destroyed more German aircraft in aerial combat than any other Allied fighter, with 3,572 confirmed kills in the European theater alone. It required forgetting that the 56th Fighter Group flying P-47s exclusively ended the war as the highest scoring group, with 677 aerial victories, and that it achieved this while refusing to transition to the Mustang even when other groups did so. The narrative of the Mustang as the war-winning fighter demanded that the Thunderbolt be remembered as a bridge aircraft, a temporary solution that the Mustang had rendered obsolete. The reality was more complicated and more revealing of what actually wins wars. The Mustang's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. The Rolls-Royce Merlin engine was a liquid-cooled inline design, a configuration that delivered exceptional performance but carried a fatal fragility. A single bullet through the coolant system could force the pilot to abandon the aircraft within minutes. The P-47's Pratt Whitney R-2800 double wasp radial engine, by contrast, had no vulnerable coolant lines. Its air-cooled cylinders could sustain damage that would have destroyed a Merlin. Pilots returned with cylinders missing, with propeller blades shattered. The P-47's structural integrity, its ability to absorb punishment and return to base, was not merely a pilot comfort, it was a strategic asset. Every Thunderbolt that limped home with battle damage was an aircraft that did not need to be replaced, a pilot who did not need to be trained. The statistics of survivability are stark. The P-47 was lost at a rate of 0.7% per mission, a figure that no other fighter could approach. The Mustang's loss rate was higher, not because it was poorly flown, but because its design philosophy prioritized performance over durability. When a Mustang was hit in the cooling system, the pilot had few options, knowing that every minute increased the risk of catastrophic failure. Or he could bail out over enemy territory. The Thunderbolt pilot, hit in the same engagement, could often continue fighting. The same radial engine that German pilots had mocked as excessive and industrial became, in the calculus of attrition, the decisive factor. The Mustang's range, its defining advantage, came with compromises. The drop tanks were not merely additional fuel, they were additional vulnerability. A hit on a drop tank meant not just lost range, but a fire hazard. Many Mustang pilots found themselves short of fuel on the return leg. The Thunderbolt, with its shorter range but greater internal fuel capacity and more efficient cruise consumption, did not suffer from this particular anxiety. Its pilots knew, with a confidence that Mustang pilots could not always share, that their aircraft would bring them home. The tactical evolution of the air war also complicates the Mustang-centric narrative. Big Week in February 1944 was fought primarily by P-47s and P-38s. The Mustang's reputation was also shaped by the post-war needs of the USAAF, which became the independent United States Air Force in 1947. The new service needed a founding myth. The P-51, as the long-range escort that had made strategic bombing possible, became the symbol of this new doctrine. The Thunderbolt, with its emphasis on durability, firepower, and close support, did not fit this narrative as neatly. It was an army fighter. From D-Day to VE Day, P-47s destroyed 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. They dropped over 132,000 tons of bombs and fired millions of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition against ground targets. The P-51's liquid-cooled engine was acutely vulnerable to ground fire. The Thunderbolt's radial engine absorbed punishment that would have destroyed a Mustang. Francis Gabreski, the top-scoring American ace in Europe with 28 victories, scored every single one in the P-47. Robert S. Johnson also flew the Thunderbolt exclusively. Both men had opportunities to transition to Mustangs. Both chose to remain with the aircraft that had brought them through engagements that would have destroyed a less robust machine. The United States produced 15,683 P-47s and approximately 15,000 P-51s. The aircraft that was easier to build was not necessarily the aircraft that was more effective. The P-47 was rapidly phased out, its heavy fuel consumption making it ill-suited to the jet age. The Mustang won the longer historical race. But winning the historical race is not the same as winning the war. The P-47 Thunderbolt did not merely escort bombers, it destroyed the Luftwaffe's force. The P-51 Mustang was a superb aircraft, but it does not deserve to be the only aircraft in that place. The Thunderbolt was not elegant. It was heavy and ugly, but it was sufficient. The P-51 Mustang won the war in the history books. The P-47 Thunderbolt won it in the air.